Yes, we are on live now, and we have, yes, it is 7 o'clock, so we are on time, and we are very happy to welcome all the audience today at one of the startup.
Hit record. Hey, Brock, hit record.
Yes, let's.
Yeah, because you have such a great intro, I don't want to have that get missed.
All right, I should begin again. I think everybody can hear us, right? Perfect. If you can hear us, just write something on the chat box. Yes, perfect. And welcome to another Startup Istanbul webinars. This is a crash course this time, and we are very happy to welcome two distinguished, selective, honored speaker and moderator, Bill and Kent. And also very happy to host lots of audience from all over the world. And we will be very happy to see you in our next events as well. And as the outbreak is spread all over the world, these webinars will hopefully add value to startups. So that's the reason we will keep continuing these courses, interviews, and meetings. And let me give a word to Bill and also Kent. Welcome, Kent and Bill, and we are happy and ready to listen, both of you.
Oh, thank you so much, Brock. This is Bill Kenny, and welcome everybody. And it is a great pleasure to welcome Kent. Do you want to say hi, Kent, and then I can introduce you? And
yeah, hi everybody.
It's great to have you, Kent. So for those that don't know, Kent and I are on the East Coast of the U.S. I'm in Connecticut, and Kent is just a little bit west of Boston. And so I'm kind of in between Boston and New York, and Kent's just a little bit outside. So we're looking out our windows at a rainy, cool, damp day here. And it's good to hear for those that are in Istanbul that it's sunny, and hopefully wherever you are, it's nice and sunny and warm as well. So our topic today is a crash course in enterprise sales for startup founders. I got to meet Kent, I don't know, it was probably a couple of years ago now. And he's really just a phenomenal resource. Some of his background, just so you know, he has been a technology executive with and had 4 successful exits. 3, he was the CEO and founder. And he's, besides his success in business, he is a phenomenal contributor to the entrepreneur community. He's put in over 30 years of mentor service and board service in the Boston ecosystem and global ecosystem. And it's a real privilege to have him on the call today. And just so you know the way this is going to work, Kent has some really good content. And I do see a question about, is the session being recorded? Yes, it is. So this will be available afterwards as well if you need to cut out at some point. And then I may interrupt him once, twice, 3 times with some questions, but I don't want to interrupt him too much. So, but I would just encourage you as he's speaking, please feel free to submit questions. What we don't get to during his presentation, we'll aim to get to afterwards. So Kent has graciously said he would stay on for a while and answer additional questions. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kent and give the floor to him.
Bill, thanks very much for moderating today and that generous introduction. And Brock, thank you very much for hosting this event for everybody today. Welcome everybody. My name is Kent Summers. I'm calling from the beautiful town of Medfield, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts in the USA. I've got everybody for just 1 hour today. So I'm going to try to pack as much information I can on B2B enterprise sales in just 1 hour. I focus on practical knowledge and skills that hopefully you can apply to your business right away. So this is not about theory. It's about how do you find customers, how do you close deals, how do you generate revenue. It's small bit of the same information I've been sharing with students and founders at MIT, Harvard Business School, and lots of international programs for the past 10 years. Hopefully it's not too much information in a short period of time, but nonetheless, strap yourselves in and here we go. So I want to start by sharing some good news with everyone today. As a founder, in my experience, there's only two things you need to worry about with your startup: revenue and everything else. You get the revenue piece right, everything else seems doable. You don't get the revenue piece right, nothing else matters. So revenue is the difference between a startup and an expensive hobby. Sales, as it turns out, is your most expensive investment in terms of real and opportunity costs. It's expensive to get right. It's extremely expensive to get wrong. So a couple definitions here. HBS definition of early stage selling. Well, it's a little bit different than the MIT definition, which I prefer. Debugging people's objections to spending money. So that's a good description of sales from a technical mind. Let's define enterprise sales. First of all, it's a business-to-business transaction. You're not selling to an individual, you're selling to a company. And you're solving complex goals, problems, and needs for your customer. If it weren't complex, it wouldn't be a problem, or they already would have solved it. And because of that complexity, most sales today, especially with early stage startups, are innovation driven. You're solving an older problem, and you're taking a very innovative approach to solving that problem.
Hey, Kent?
Yes.
I'm sorry for interrupting. You might just want to hit your slide mode, your presentation mode.
I'm in presentation mode.
We're seeing the program. So if you just hit your, it's down in the lower right.
Hang on, I'm gonna try sharing my screen instead, because that worked well last time. Pardon me, everyone, while we get set up here.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
There's Fenway Park for those that haven't been there.
All right.
There you go. Perfect.
All right. So we doing now? You all right here?
You're perfect. Yep.
Okay, great. All right. So as I mentioned, enterprise sales, it's a B2B transaction that's solving a complex goal, problem, or need, driven by innovation and their higher price offerings, and not necessarily higher priced because of what it costs you to build your system, but higher priced mostly due to the scale of the problem that you're solving for the enterprise. So if you solve a $1 problem a million times, you're solving $1 million problem. Enterprise sales almost always involves a number of unknowns and uncertainties. And in sales, it's really important to recognize those, to spot those, and manage them lest they manage you. Enterprise sales is very competitive. Greenfield sales are very uncommon. Almost every sale replaces something or someone, sometimes someone inside the organization, and knowing what you're displacing with your sale is very important. And of course, because there's people inside the enterprise, there's lots of agendas and forces that are embedded, part of the culture that you have to sort of understand and navigate through the enterprise sales process. And enterprise sales also almost always involves a team purchasing decision. Very uncommon that the same person evaluates the offering, makes a decision, and writes the check. It's much more typical that those steps in the sale occur between a distributed team inside the enterprise. And because of all this, enterprise sales involves a long, expensive sales cycle. So I want to think about the new mindset of enterprise sales and a different way of thinking about it. Enterprise sales is not about picking winners and losers any more than investing in companies is about picking winners and losers. As much as you think you like to do that, nobody's very good at it. That's why VCs play a numbers game, and they hope that a very small percentage of their startups get acquired or IPO, which covers the cost of the rest of them. Sales is very similar. Sales is about feeding a process where at the end of the day, there's only two things under your control: your attitude and your behavior. We're going to be talking about that today. And it also turns out that enterprise sales is something that most technical founders can be good at. A lot of people enter sales with a sort of a misperception of sales and salespeople based upon long-standing myths about sales. I like to say it's the second oldest profession out there. And with that comes some baggage and some myth. But once you understand it and put sales in the context of helping and supporting the customer, it becomes a much more natural place for technical founders to engage. The sales profession itself is the closest profession to a full contact sport, and because of that, it involves many skills that are similar to an athlete: talent, coaching, team play, and execution skills. Very similar to a sport. It's also a numbers game with a very unattractive win-loss ratio. It is a 90% failure-driven activity. Sales is a failure-driven activity. So how many of you got up this morning and said, hey, you know what? It's going to be a great day. I'm going to fail at 90% of everything I do today. All right. Not too often people enter their day with that type of attitude. And I'll share something with you right now. It's not a 90% failure-driven activity. Enterprise sales is much closer to a 97% failure-driven activity. So it's about dealing with that 97% and pushing that out of your way and focusing on closing that 3%. And it can be a pretty brutal and unrewarding task, working with the majority of the people that you interact with that you end up not having as a customer. So there's a lot of disappointment that comes along with the sales function itself. Now, everybody at MIT has their own algorithm, their own formula. I'm no different. I'm going to share with you my formula for sales, enterprise sales today, and it's SW cubed over N, and that stands for some will, some won't, so what, next. This is the attitude that you have to be productive in sales and to survive and even thrive in a failure-driven profession. The technical founder is always the first salesperson in a startup. Why? Because you have intimate knowledge of the offering, the customer, the need, the value. You have much more knowledge about this than anyone on the planet. And you also have this distorted view of reality. You've innovated something. And because of that innovation, you have sort of a skewed view of the world that's necessary to overcome being a new company and having a new product. So you have this strong reality distortion field that's actually you use to your advantage. And of course, just as important, you need to be on the front line here and understand firsthand all of the issues that are blocking customer traction and adoption of your offering. This early product feedback is essential to figure out how you're going to hone in on your product market fit. And it's the requests that you get from customers and the rejections that provide you very valuable fuel for your product roadmap. So this is where you make the transition as a founder from a vision-driven company to a market-driven company. You start to impact your product roadmap based upon feedback from folks because they failed to write you a check or they did write you a check, and now that starts to confirm and validate, in many cases, enhance your product roadmap. I can tell you from my personal experience working with both from an operational perspective, an investment, and a board and a mentor perspective with startups for the past 20 years, startups will fail almost 100% of the time when the technical founder believes that hiring a salesperson will solve the sales dilemma. The first salesperson in a startup is not something that you outsource. If you want your startup to fail, outsource sales to somebody else, bring in a professional salesperson, and ask them to figure out who your customer is. You will fail. It will probably set your startup back at least a year on a good day. So let's look at that learning curve for a salesperson. When you first bring a salesperson into your organization, they're of course very, very optimistic, and they're that way largely because they're uninformed. They believe in your vision, they're enthusiastic about your offering, so are you, but they're largely uninformed. So you go out there in the marketplace and you get beat up a little bit. And now you become a little bit more informed, and some notion of pessimism starts to creep into your mindset. You're not nearly as optimistic as you were before. It's harder than you thought it would be. But you know what? You're a persistent person. You're going to stick with it, and you're going to hold on and see if you can't figure this thing out. So you continue on, and all of a sudden you reach this, what I call a crisis of confidence. You're looking at a lot of time that you've just invested, and nobody has given you any encouraging feedback. You haven't landed any customers. In fact, all you hear from prospects is, I would buy it from you if you did this or if it did that. You get all these excuses and proxies for no, but you don't get a check. And you're having this crisis of confidence largely because you just walked through the great abyss of rejection. For the past 6, 12, 18 months, all you've heard is no and excuses and proxies for no. And it's a very, very disappointing experience. By the way, this is a great time in your life to buy a dog. If you don't have a dog, go out and buy one. They love you. They're very encouraging every day. They're never going to object to anything. It's not necessarily a good time to be in a relationship with another human, but if you don't have a dog, now's a good time to buy one. So you're in this crisis now, and you have to figure out what you're going to do. And basically, one or two things are going to happen here. You're going to crash and burn. You're going to say, well, this is a year or two of my life I'm not going to get back. I'm going to go get a job. Or you're going to fight your way through it. You're going to use all of the knowledge that you gained to enhance and change your offering. And it could be the positioning, could be the messaging, could be the target market, could be the feature function. But you're going to push your way through that, and you're going to reach the fourth phase, which is informed optimism. So now you've learned a great deal. You've gone through this great abyss of rejection, and you've taken all that knowledge and you've changed your offering and everything about your offering. So now you've kind of figured out the product market fit. So this is the typical salesperson's learning curve. Now, from a founder, you're going to experience and many of you are currently experiencing this same curve, but from a founder's perspective, your happiness curve is not 6, 12, 18 months, it's 3, 4, 5 years to survive this curve from a startup. And I'd like to tell you that to be a lot more optimistic, that you're going to fight your way through this in 1 or 2 years, but it does take a while to create a company and reach a point where you can start selling product to the marketplace. So with that, I'd like to jump into the sales toolkit here. Because sales is a numbers game, tools and a methodology is critical for the focus and efficiency in answering the daily question you have every day in sales. And this is, what is the most productive use of my time today? Sales offers you lots of opportunity to work hard. You can work 18-hour days very easily in sales, and still your performance could be very, very poor. So it's really about focus and efficiency and what is the most productive use of your time. And this is irrespective of your offering, your target market. It doesn't matter what industry you're selling to. This is a universal question that salespeople have every day. And there's 2 tools that you can rely on to help you get a good, reliable answer to this question. The first is the customer profile, and this is specific criteria you define as a founder to focus your daily activity. And the sales pipeline. Once you zero in on your product market fit and you know who your customer profile is, your sales pipeline is your methodology for time management. It's how do you make the most productive use of your time every day when you focus your time on only prospects that meet your target customer profile. So let's start by talking about the profile. Again, it's to focus your sales activity. The profile consists of 3 elements. First is the company profile, which consists of an industry, a company type, and size, and geography. So for example, the financial services industry of type family office that manages over 50 million in capital within 25 miles of Boston. That's a good example of a well-defined company profile. Once you define that, inside the company profile is really the buyer profile. This profile consists of a job title or role, specific responsibilities, and unmet needs inside that organization, typically around a specific use case. The buyer profile, your buyer, often in sales called an ally or a champion. This is the person that stands to gain the most or lose the most with your offering. This is the person that's most closely involved with your offering. So using the prior company profile example, this might be a research analyst who's responsible for doing due diligence on investments, using very outdated, error-prone, and inefficient research methods. That would be a good buyer profile. And then lastly, after you define your company profile and inside that your buyer profile, you have your decision-making unit. And this is the team, the group within that organization that's responsible for vetting your offering and has access to a checkbook. And as I mentioned before, it's probably involves your buyer, but it's other folks in the organization that are involved in that evaluation process. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in just a little while, because this is a very important aspect of sales. This is a game changer if you don't know how to identify your decision-making unit. Ultimately, you have a theory about who these, what this customer profile looks like in your business plan, but you're probably wrong. You're going to learn your profile from talking with at least 100 prospects out there in the marketplace, and you're going to use that knowledge and that feedback from the marketplace to fine tune and hone in on your product market fit. As you do this, I'm going to offer some suggestions here. First, when defining your company profile and your buyer profile, gather facts, not opinions. Don't ask people, would they do something if you did this or whatever. Gather facts. Do you do something? Does this happen? Don't gather opinions. Lots of people have opinions, and opinions don't write checks. Facts write checks. So when you're defining your customer profile and refining it, seek facts, not opinions. And seek facts related to real pain and cost inside the organization. People write checks for pain to go away. Implied gains are very difficult. Lots of people like to talk about potential upsides, but not too many people with check writing authority will write a check over speculation. Find the pain, find the cost, use facts to do that. And lastly, facts, pain, and cost related to a single business use case. Most startups, if you ask a founder who uses your product, they may rip off 3 or 4 different use cases. Well, it can be used for this, it can be used for this, and that is all very valid and may be very true, but ultimately you need to decide as a founder, what is your beachhead here? What is your single use case that you're going to focus your sales activity? If you don't do that, your focus is hugely dilutive. So you end up chasing multiple scenarios. At the end of the day, you've got to focus on a single scenario that you feel represents the strongest traction or represents the most logical starting point for getting your business started. This use case does not define the destiny of your business. It just defines how you get started. There's only one way to validate your customer profile, and that is you get purchase orders from different companies to solve a similar problem. That's different companies to solve a similar problem. That's the only way to validate your customer profile. I talk to founders all the time. They say, oh, I've got my MVP with my product. I'm out there trying to sell. And I said, well, how many have you sold? And they said 0. Well, you don't have MVP unless you have at least a half a dozen purchase orders that are solving a similar problem for different companies. So this is the real definition of minimum viable product. You don't define it, the market does. All right, so that's it for the customer profile. Let's talk about the pipeline here. You've probably seen this maybe in literature or in class before. It's also called a funnel because it looks like one, and you've got leads coming in the top of the funnel, which go to suspects, then prospects, then opportunities, then of course customers out the back end of the funnel. Suspects are where you filter your leads to meet your company profile. Prospects are where you physically engage somebody inside that company and confirm that the buyer profile exists. Opportunities are actively involved in your sales process, and of course we know what customers are. And the length of time it takes you to go from a suspect to a customer is called your sales cycle. And the sales cycle has these things in between the different sales stages called conversion metrics. And these are very important to understand because these are what you need to understand to debug your sales process. They're also an important factor in sales forecasting, which I'm not going to talk about today. But at the end of the day, if your conversion metrics are not increasing, if those metrics, conversion metrics are not increasing left to right, you don't have a funnel. You don't have a tight enough filter or enough discipline around how you enable company or suspects to go to prospects and prospects to go to opportunities. It's all hands on deck inside a company when you're defining your company profile. But once you start selling and you've defined your company profile, you do not want to engage your team. This is a waste of their time because people are not qualified to take your team's time. It's shaped like a funnel because two things are happening here. Triage. You're kicking people out of the funnel because they're not qualified to take your time. And similarly, prospective customers are kicking you out of their lives because they're not interested in your product. So that's what shapes it into a funnel. Ultimately, this is where you want to engage your team. And effective enterprise sales, which I'll get into in a little bit here, is not about being a hero. It's not a one-on-one sale. Once you have a team, it's about orchestrating your team expertise and resources to engage similar resources and expertise within the prospective buyer. The sooner and the better you can engage your team with their team, the more likelihood you're going to generate a sale. So this is a sales funnel. And if you look at a big organization, marketing is responsible for generating the leads and filtering them down to meet your target company profile. And they hand those off to inside salespeople. Inside salespeople, they pound the phone and they get beat up. And then eventually they discover somebody that expresses interest and hands that qualified person over to field sales, which develops the opportunity and then ultimately closes the deal. And field sales can't be burdened by existing customers, so they would hand that relationship, they would transition that relationship to an account manager. So this is a little bit of how you understand how sales and marketing work inside a large organization. And this is actually how you scale and make it from a startup to a scale up to a larger company, because each one of these functions actually requires very specific skill sets and disciplines to do well at its scale. Now, for you as a founder, this whole thing's a lot easier. You get to do everything, so it's a lot easier, but it's important for you to understand that you are managing and executing on multiple functions during the sales process.
Hey, Kent.
Yes.
So a question for you, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
So here's a question. It actually came across from the YouTube stream. How can we convince our partner company that our product is not just good, but needful? A needful product increases sales, wherein a good product is just an option. So do you have a thought on that? Is it possible to convince someone that they need your product, or do you have to define what they need and build something to that?
Well, at the end of the day, I found that startups are much more successful when they build product with the customer, not for the customer. So the most successful startups, in my experience, engage prospective customers day one during the design phase of their product. So you're not designing it for them, you're designing it with them. So I get asked this question all the time from founders, and that is, when should I start selling? And my answer is always the same: yes. Right?
Absolutely, every day.
Start right away, start engaging the marketplace. If you find yourself trying to convince a prospective customer of the value of your product, you probably didn't engage the marketplace early enough, and you're probably missing the boat, right? Because at the end of the day, if you build it with customers, not for them, there's no mystery as to the value. You're solving a very well-defined concrete need with the customer, and they will buy it from you. So hopefully that answers the question.
I think it's perfect. I'll let you get back to it.
Okay. All right, so sales pipeline for you, it's a methodology, right? And this methodology helps you define the sequential name steps of your sales process that help you organize and focus and balance your sales activity. Again, suspects are filtered leads that meet your company profile. Prospects are where initial contact confirms that there's interest expressed from the buyer profile, and opportunities are prospects who have qualified and are actively engaged in the decision-making unit and vetting your process. And of course, we know what customers are. There's your conversion metrics. It should increase left to right. If they're not, you are not being disciplined enough or have tight enough criteria in moving the time that you spend with people from left to right in your sales process. These conversion metrics help you debug your sales process, and they are also an important factor in sales forecasting. Now, we all understand that leads are the raw material of sales. Where you get those leads matter, and how efficiently you run your sales process, your sleuth, if you're mining, that also matters. There's two types: old school lead gen, right? This is where you define outreach programmatically, could be email campaigns, could be events. There's a number of different ways to target groups of prospects to solicit their response and interest. We all know what outbound lead generation looks like. And of course, these days, thanks to the internet, there's also SEO and PPC, Google and others. I am a huge fan of inbound lead gen. It's so much more efficient and it's much more scalable. The sales economics are much more attractive with inbound lead gen. Now, the right answer with most startups is a little bit of both, but I strongly recommend making an investment in inbound lead generation. They both require a significant amount of experimentation and refinement to do well. The reason I like inbound primarily is the buyer, prospective buyer, initiates the contact, not the seller. So somebody calls you up or they send you an email and your response is, how can I help you? Not, here's what I have to sell you. Big, big difference. So because the buyer is initiating the contact, their need, their attention, their priorities is already established. Where when you're in outbound marketing, you have no idea as to whether or not your offering is relevant, let alone whether it's a priority or a need inside that organization. It's just not established. So these are the two big differences between outbound and inbound. If you're if you are focusing primarily on outbound lead gen, you have to be very good at direct marketing. At inbound, you have to figure out and be very good at SEO and PPC, search engine optimization, and pay-per-click ad campaigns, primarily on Google. And the reason I love inbound so much is the sales economics, the scalability, the cost for a lead, and the conversion to a paying customer, and the time and resources required are so much more efficient with SEO and PPC than they are with traditional outbound lead generation methods. So a couple basic rules of customer prospecting. Prospecting law, number one, remember I said sales is a failure-driven profession. Because of that, you're going to interact with 100 prospects for every 1 to 3 that close. And at the outset, they all pretty much appear the same. Prospecting law number two, you're going to have to touch everybody to determine who's real. Who is that 1, 2, or 3 within that 100% that is going to be a customer of ours? There are no shortcuts. And prospecting law number three, at the outset, you're working with folks, you're talking with them. If they're a great fit, they're really, really easy to spot. You know what your customer, they meet your profile, you've hit it right on the button. Not only it's an immediate priority. Your messaging resonates. They're ready to buy. You really hit the sweet spot. They're really easy to spot. It's the prospects that are not a good fit that still want to take up your time. These are the people that are difficult to spot. This is where you need to focus your time on sales, right? Sales is not about closing the 2 or 3% that are a great fit. It's about getting rid of the other 90%. How do you do that efficiently without losing customers in the process? So the reality that you will likely discover, if you haven't already, of managing a sales pipeline is you're going to uncover great opportunities that just sit in your pipeline forever, and they just don't close. But and it's an enigma. You just don't understand why they're not closing because they're such a great fit. Conversely, you're going to encounter opportunities that you don't feel are a perfect fit, who are going to request and then sign an agreement with you, and it's just kind of like, where did that come from? And customer timing can also be a complete mystery as well, especially when you don't learn to manage it. The reason timing is such a mystery in sales is oftentimes the buyer doesn't know what the timing is. And so that's a very difficult thing. And there are ways of managing it. I'm not going to have time to cover that today, but that's also can also be a complete mystery in sales. So at the end of the day, there's only so much under your influence and control. And everything is outside your control. A little bit more advice to you today: just don't sweat the stuff that you can't control. Don't fret over the unpredictable nature of sales, because at the end of the day, there's only two things that you control: your attitude and your behavior. Remember my formula: some will, some won't, so what, next, right? That is an attitude. It turns out that attitude and behavior are the two best predictors of sales success if you learn how to manage them. When you have, and let's look at the end of the day, the trade-off in sales is efficiency versus performance. And we all know the traditional salesperson who pushes. They're very, very efficient. They want yes or no right away. They're very helpful. They'll help you by giving you a pen to sign an agreement, and that's about it. They're going to drive you to purchase. They're very, very efficient, but the performance is horrible because nobody likes a pushy salesperson. Moving along this curve, you've got what I call the dreamer. This is the person that's very optimistic, and they seek reasons to keep prospects active. And their pipeline just gets bigger and bigger and bloated because the person is not being very disciplined about where they spend their time. They have hope, they have optimism, which, by the way, are not good things if you're a founder and not good things if you're a salesperson. The performance tends to improve a little bit because you're not nearly as obnoxious, but still your efficiency just drops off the map. Moving along this curve, you have what I call the mechanic. This is the person that's a little bit more disciplined. They're willing to move people out of their funnel and make room for more of their mind share, dealing with new prospective customers. This person recognizes the absence of buying signals and moves on. And then ultimately, you have the facilitator, right? This is the person that proactively helps prospects sell themselves or opt out of your sales process. And I'm going to spend a little time today talking about the facilitator, because that's ultimately where you want to be as a salesperson. So I started out earlier by saying sales is not about picking winners and losers. And unfortunately, a lot of people, it's a very natural instinct for them to do that. And it's something that they don't have the discipline to get away from. And when you focus on just your top opportunities inside an organization, you just pick those 2 or 3 deals that are likely to close at the direct expense of all of the other prospects in your sales funnel. You ignore new leads, you ignore developing leads, you ignore everything else. You just focus exclusively on those top 2 deals that are most likely to close. This is what your life is going to look like. in sales. It's going to be like Groundhog Day. You might get a customer, you may not. Eventually, when you get a customer and then you get them deployed, up and running, you go back to your sales funnel and there's nothing there. You don't even recognize any of the names anymore. You've been so busy focusing all of your time on just one or two deals. So it's just an up and down roller coaster. Versus a balanced sales activity where you focus 50% of your time on those top 2 or 3 opportunities and the rest of your time developing the funnel, qualifying leads, continue efforts to qualify and develop new opportunities, but you're balancing your sales activity. And when you take a disciplined approach to balancing your activity in sales, this is what your life will look like. This is how you get out of the up and down Groundhog Day in sales. Now, the cool thing about startups, in my experience, is you have this thing called running out of money, which is a great example of why top opportunity focused sales, unbalanced sales activity is not a good idea. So the only way to get out of the up and down top opportunity focus and into a scalable and eventually cash flow positive, sustainable business is by balancing your sales activity. That is not attitude, that is disciplined behavior. So you have to be very disciplined to balance your sales activity and resist the temptation to not spend all your time chasing those top 1 or 2 deals. Balance your sales activity across each stage of your pipeline. That's the only way that you develop a cash flow positive, sustainable business. Unbalanced sales activity, it's risky, it's not sustainable. Do not assume who will close. Establish your own sales discipline and cadence by investing in everything in your funnel. Sales, you're not going to see it materialize right away, but you're actually investing good mojo into your entire pipeline. It's kind of like, in this positive value will accumulate in your pipeline over time. It's kind of like watching grass grow, try to watch grass grow or paint drying. You don't see them happening, but they both do. So balance your activity in your pipeline. Resist the temptation to invest all your time chasing the top 2 or 3 deals. That's a
Kent, I have another question if you like.
Yep.
Okay, so here it is. Let's see. Since sales is a failure-driven process, what are your top 2 thoughts on debugging between prospects that just won't make a buying decision and prospects you need to give more reasons to buy?
So that's a great question, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute, and that is chasing no. So I'm going to get to that.
Just so you know, we have about 12 minutes till.
Yeah, I have a technique. All right,
yep.
So I'm going to move on here. I'm going to get the no here. All right, so sales is not about qualifying prospective customers. It's about disqualifying customers with the prospective real. And I'm going to get to your question there, Bill. It's about chasing no early in the opportunity versus chasing yes. So you have 10% of your leads are actual prospects. Let's unpack prospects. They actually consist of yes, yes, but, and no. Yes and no's, they're easy. You go to a contract or they exit your process. If somebody says yes, but, that's buying behavior. You can negotiate to a yes by making a concession or convert to a yes by making a contortion. It's this middle area here that's very ambiguous. This is where what I call the slow no. This is the death knell for salespeople. And this is where you have to proactively chase people out. You want to invest your time up there, not down here. So you have 2 options as a salesperson. You can work 18-hour days, or you can really get good at disqualifying prospects proactively. So that's the answer to your question. is not selling to somebody, but asking them disqualifying questions that solicits observable and actionable buying signals or stalling signals. Because oftentimes the buyer will not send you those signals if you do not solicit disqualifying signals from the customer. So sales is not about qualifying prospective customers. It's about disqualifying prospects with the appearance of real. So slow no, it's always your second best answer in sales. Or no is always your second best answer, and the slow no is always your worst answer. So you have to take ownership of no in sales. Or if you don't, you're going to prepare to spend most of your time working deals that go no. Again, buying signals easy to spot, stalling signals very ambiguous. The majority of your deals, because it's a failure-driven profession, should result in no thank you, but they don't. Because sales doesn't come easily for most people. They want to avoid conflict, they have an ego, you're not taught that no, they may have an ulterior motive. Most prospects, they have their own motives and they're not going to say no, and they're just going to simply take up your time. And I'm sure anybody that's been out there selling prospective customers, you've already experienced this, right? Here's some advice for all of you that are suffering under the slow no. Up front, ask people for no. Give them permission to say no. Say, listen, I'm only going to take up too much of your time. I want 2 minutes of your time. I'm going to describe what I do. I think it can help you a lot. Please say no. When you give permission to people to say no, they will actually say no and not feel like they're being rude, and you've removed the opportunity for them to use their alternative agenda as a reason for continuing to take up your time. Later on, say no for people, right? And assess their reaction. Give them an opportunity to opt out of your sales process and see how they react. I call that off-ramping. Off-ramping consists of non-threatening questions, tests, or challenges that provide insight into lots of things that you don't know about the prospect, but more importantly, they provide stalling and buying signals which are observable and actionable by you. They help prospects self-qualify or disengage. I'll give you a couple examples really quickly. You haven't heard from somebody in a couple of months. You finally get them on the phone. You say, listen, sounds like you're busy right now. Maybe if we just pick up our discussion in another month or two. Well, the off-ramp is thanks, you're probably right. And you know what, you were considerate. The buying signal is no way, we're dying here. Sorry, I was busy. We're just wrapping up end of quarter. We really need your solution. Let's re-engage, right? There's a good example of a probe, an off-ramp that you sent that solicits a buying signal or a stalling signal. Another off-ramp, can't you just do X or Y? Recommend their alternatives and see how they react to that. If they're not looking at their alternatives, they're probably not doing their homework, which means they're not serious about buying. So you might as well get them on the table early. If those alternatives hadn't occurred to them, you're probably talking to somebody that's not qualified. If they are qualified, they've probably already looked at them, and your best answer there is they're non-starters, and here's why. So here's a couple of quick examples of off-ramps. If your prospect they have the appearance of being qualified, off-ramps provide a fast, frictionless exit from your process, and you've done it very graciously. If they are genuinely qualified, what happens is it builds confidence and trust in you by not driving to a yes, and it actually turns out off-ramps strengthen their resolve and provide you valuable insights on how to be successful selling. So in sales, resist the temptation to pick winners, help prospects sell themselves or gracefully opt out, develop your own set of probing questions that are relevant to your offering, right? Successful enterprise sales is not about the claims or the statements you make. It's about the great questions that you ask. I'm not going to I want to just jump to a quick slide here Building the decision-making unit inside an organization is very, very important. And I'm going to talk about when you get inside an organization, you're going to be dealing with stakeholders, and these stakeholders have different responsibilities, different motivations, and different purchasing criteria. So if you're selling a product to somebody in operations, all they care about is feature function. How does this offering make their job better, faster, cheaper? They're looking directly at your product. However, when you show the same product to somebody in management, they're not looking at the product and they don't care about the feature or functions. They care about whether the capabilities of that product satisfy strategic objectives like faster time to market or higher yield or open up new markets, right? They're looking at the strategic initiative shadow that your product casts on the wall from the management's perspective. Similarly, if you show that same product to some at IT, they don't care about the strategy and they don't care about the features. They're looking straight through it and they're looking at the IT shadow your product casts on the wall. Is this thing compatible with our standards? Does it have any implications to security or my resources? And the same thing with the C-level organization. Is this a top priority? They don't care about the IT. They don't care about operations. They don't care about management. The C-level person, they trust their team to vet your product from their own responsibilities and purchasing criteria. That's how a team purchasing decision is made. Always assume that any one of these people can veto your purchase. Bill, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to ask another question if I can, and then pass you on to Brock because I'm going to need to hop off. But
yeah.
So the question is, and this is a long one, and I apologize, but it's I think a worthwhile one. So, would it be worth startups to consider thorough approaches to building complex sales systems like Gartner's B2B buyer's journey, even when they're in their early stages? Or should they strictly stick to a lean approach and think simple at the early stages and leave those complex approaches to sales experts when the time comes, especially for the efficient or for the sake of efficient use of time, since the need of such complex sales processes would put additional weight on the shoulders of the founders? And I'm going to couple to that another question, which is any book recommendations you have on enterprise B2B sales. So the kind of coupling those two together because I think they fit well.
All right. So the first one, thank you, Bill. First question is easy. Do not go out there and spend money or time figuring out a complex sales system. Get an Excel spreadsheet and name the columns, right? You do not want to invest your time, your mind share, figuring out how to use another tool. In most cases, a lot of these tools are way overbuilt. They're like, they're 10 pounds of meat in a 100-pound can, okay? And you're going to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out those things that are useful to you. So my recommendation is get out an Excel spreadsheet. The rows are your prospects and the columns are the things that you care about. Like what stage are they at? When did you first contact them? Who's the primary person? A 2 or 3 sentence note. When's the last time you spoke with them? What's the next step, right? That's really just focus on the basic things that you need to know. Spend your time out there with people in the marketplace. Use a very simple Excel spreadsheet to manage your sales pipeline, and don't invest all your time and mind share in a sophisticated sales tool. That comes much later when you're involved in team sales. When you transition from founder sales to team sales, that's when you need to consider transitioning from a simple single user tool to a more sophisticated tool. So I hope that answers your question. Second question was about a book. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. Believe it or not, I've never read a sales book in my life, so I can't recommend any. These are just notes from my own personal experience, mostly from failure through 4 startups in my career. These are just my notes I'm sharing with you. So unfortunately, I can't share any sales books with you because I've never read one. I think that answers both of your questions, Bill, and I think you need to move on.
Yes, I get the replace the Bill place. So Ken, please, you can go on. We have already completed the first hour. I know there is a huge content on your presentation. Please go on.
So you want me to continue with the presentation?
Yes, you can. And we have questions.
Great. Yeah, I've only got a few more here. So let me go ahead and do that. All right. So you ask a startup, everyone thinks they know who their competition is, and they'll rattle off 3 or 4 companies that they run into, usually big companies, small companies. At the end of the day, other people out there solving a similar problem, they're less so your competitors. They're more so validating the fact that you're building toward a problem that's worth solving. Let me state that another way. If you come up with a product offering and you have no competition, I would seriously question whether there's even a market for it. So competition, in my mind, just indicates to me that the problem's worth solving, and there's a large enough addressable market to make the problem worthwhile investing in and solving. The biggest competition that I run into in sales through my career is not the competition in the traditional sense, it's the customer. It's do nothing. I always found that do nothing is your number one competitor. And that is, how do you overcome status quo bias? Now, there's a couple of concepts that I'm hopefully people are taking away from our very brief session here today. And I'm about to share with you the third one. And this is a very effective concept as well as a tool for sales. We all know the toughest part with any new customer is getting started and overcoming do nothing status quo bias. So best practice in sales is for you to define a low cost, low risk path to do something with you as a test. You do not want a customer making a strategic high dollar decision before they've proven the value of your product in practice inside their organization. So you have to lower the barrier here, right? And it turns out when you do that, trials with low entry points are extremely effective at lowering these decision barriers and overcoming do nothing. So what are the essential components of that? For each of you out there today, you decide what can you offer a new prospect today that solves a real problem in the organization that's very narrow in scope, that's low cost and low risk, establishes the value of your offering, builds credibility, and provides a logical starting point for doing more with you in the future. So real problem, narrow in scope, short on time, low on cost, no risk, establishes some of the value and builds credibility you and your organization. These are the check marks, the acid test of a getting started offering. And it turns out your best opportunities in enterprise sales are when you can offer something at a low entry point, but it has a very significant revenue growth potential inside that organization. Right? In sales, we call this land and expand. Don't attempt to expand first before you land. focus on your landing. So here's a big difference. Your customer can either do nothing or they can do something, and they're going to do nothing if the weight of what you're trying to sell them and the price of what they're trying to sell them is too heavy. So my recommendation, if you want the customer to do something, keep it lightweight, keep it inexpensive. And it turns out people will adopt that much more readily. And once you establish the value of that and you meet that criteria, that creates the opportunity to do something more. That will lead to the enterprise adoption. So start small. Don't try to sell an enterprise solution out of the gate. Keys to a successful trial. Well, they agree to test your product as a precursor to a full purchase, and they have full knowledge of the purchase price. In other words, the trial price does not establish a poor precedent. And they commit to resources and specific tasks in order to be successful with your product. If you don't define this, this can often be an objection that's often unstated as to why somebody doesn't want to try your product. And a dedication to a limited time frame. Also must define very explicit success criteria for your trial. Because if you don't do that, you have no logic or no basis from converting the trial to a purchase. There's no such thing as a free trial. I don't believe that free anything qualifies people's priority, especially in a large organization. In my experience, the sweet spot for a proof of concept, for a trial, for a pilot is in the 5 to 20K range with an enterprise, and anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks duration. Now, there's exceptions to this. I'm just sharing with you what that I've discovered is the sweet spot for a getting started offering. Have a 2 or 3 page agreement ready for your trial that does not engage IT or legal. Keep it really, really simple, and use standard industry terminology for this. A proof of concept, a trial, or a pilot, and make sure that it's bulletproof, right? You don't want to have anything custom here. Just make sure it's a push button ready to deploy, and that similarly, you and everyone on your team, you have a set play for these POCs. Everyone knows their role and responsibility and their primary points of contact in both organizations where to execute well on your POCs. So this should be a set play for your team where you push button. This is what you're selling. You're selling your getting started offering. I found that startups, they get very, very good and at repeating these startup sales to establish a foothold and establish value inside the organization. This is how a startup graduates into scale up, into scale. After you nail your landing, your trial is going to go to a pilot or enterprise deployment, depending upon what the customer wants to do. Price is almost always the #1 objection inside an enterprise before confidence and trust is established. And in my experience, after a successful trial, when you've removed the risk and built the confidence and trust in your organization, it turns out that price goes from #1 to #6 on their list of concerns, right? So my advice to startups here is don't be afraid to scale price to value. Add a couple of zeros. The value of it is what it's worth to the buyer, the scale of the problem you're solving. And I know it's very uncomfortable for lots of founders to put a big price out there, but you can always discount that. The surefire way of finding out that you undersold your product is somebody agrees to it very quickly. Your goal in sales is to debug people's objections to writing you a check until the only objection that remains is price. So don't be afraid to add another couple of zeros onto your quote here. And I know that a lot of technical founders, they're unaccustomed to that. So I'm just going to show you right where it is on your keyboard there. That's where the 0 is. Press it a couple times. You want people to object to price and nothing else. The golden rule in startups, I'm not going to have time to go through that today. In short, the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules, and that's about aligning how you get paid with how the customer buys. I have a couple of examples here. We're understanding what the budgeting cycle is. Is it an OPEX or CAPEX focus? Is it under discretionary spend? What budgets do they have available? And at the end of the day, if they don't have cash, what can they provide you for compensation for your offering? So you can succeed in establishing a strong value proposition and eagerness to buy amongst the stakeholder and decision-making unit. But if you fail to understand how the buyer buys, you can fail to get the deal. So it's not about how you sell, it's how the buyer buys. Successful startups are very good at adapting to how the buyer buys. So last piece of advice for you today, use your references to confirm a decision that your customer has made, not to make a decision. Your trusted customer references are your silver bullets in sales. Use them as a closing checkmate. They're most powerful when people are looking at your price, they're looking at your quote, they're looking at your proposal. That's when you want to provide your references, not before that. So enterprise sales, it's not about chasing people. It's about helping people achieve a goal, solve a problem, or satisfy a need by purchasing your product or service. It's not about picking winners or losers. It's about feeding a disciplined process that provokes observable and buying and stalling signals. And it turns out if you have the right attitude and have the right behavior, these transactions will naturally occur. Those are the only two things under your control. Manage them wisely. Don't pick winners. Balance your sales activity. Invest your time with prospects who understand and value what you do. Leave evangelism up to marketing. Align how you get paid with how the customer buys. Learn to own, know, and off ramps in sales, or prepare to spend most of your day working deals that go nowhere. And make sure you have a low cost path to get started, because you don't, you're competing with yourself. Define what your low cost offering is to get started. Always know who you're talking to, what is their perspective based upon their responsibilities and motivations, right? Speed up sales by slowing down and segmenting your process. I didn't have a lot of time to talk about this today. Don't try to dump all your information in the first meeting and expect it to result in sales, but segment and slow down your sales process. You'll actually find that actually speeds up sales. And just don't cough up your references too early. Tell people, listen, I'm protecting my customers' time. If it turns out that you're serious doing business with us, I'd be happy to share our references should we reach that part of our process. I know this was a lot of information in a short period of time here. I hope there's one or two things here that you've found interesting and can help you strengthen the sales of your startup, or at least think about enterprise sales. Brock, I'd like to now open this up to questions. I think we still have a few minutes here.
Ken, thank you very much for this valuable 1 hour crash course. I know it takes longer than this amount of time, and it was great, and it flowed like a river. And I was very inspired from lots of information and your experiences as well. I was very shocked that you haven't read any book, but I mean, these are your experiences. This is very valuable because you have a history of experiences in startups and companies, and you have exits. And I think this video and recording will be also valuable for the startups who are, of course, in this situation, are looking for sales and increasing their sales activities, hopefully next month. And thank you very much for this crash course. And we will be very happy to host you back with the next chapters of this course as well.
Well, Brock, thank you very much. Everybody, nice to meet you from Boston. Be safe out there in these crazy times, and hope this was a good use of your time today. Hope you picked up a couple of things that are helpful and valuable. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Kent, and thank you, everybody that attended this course, and hope to see you next week as well.